Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. This is the TSA Pipeline Security Directives webinar. My name is Becky Harrison. I'm the marketing manager here at Dragos. Just a few housekeeping items for today. This webinar will be recorded and the recording will be sent out after the webinar. And we will have a copy of the slides as well that will be sent to you after the webinar. Everyone will be muted, but please feel free to use the Q&A if you have any questions. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Mike Hoffman. He's the Principal Industrial Consultant for Dragos.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Becky. And really excited to be here and to talk about this directive. And, a lot of people think, how can you be excited about a directive? Well, I get excited about security and I get excited about industrial security. And I know we're talking about something that we have to do now. We have this directive coming our way, and a lot of you have been working on it for quite a while already. But let's kind of get into the weeds of this a little bit and kind of uncover some of the things. And if nothing else, I hope this provides a different perspective and just the way we're going through material and those kind of things. Now, calling this a workshop, the reason why is I'd like you folks to be very responsive in the Q&A, put a lot of questions in there. I definitely want this kind of be a two-way communication as well. Also, before we started, I had a chance to look at a number of the attendees, and a number of you folks I recently saw at DISC. And so awesome to see people from the community coming out, being a part of that conference, and also just being a part of the community and sharing all your insights. So I really appreciate all you do. So if you don't know me, and I've been out in the community a little bit, I have, or I've been at 2 years essentially with Dragos. So my role as a principal industrial consultant. And so essentially what I do is I do a lot of architecture reviews. A lot of customers will call in, to assess the environment. Also do, again, the VADR, which we used to call them for the TSA requirements on 2.b. Now we're kind of calling them the CATR, so it's kind of the same thing, but a different acronym. But nevertheless, I do a lot of that kind of thing, a lot of tabletops. In fact, we're focusing a lot on executive level tabletops. So kind of moving from a technical side and all the way up to executive and doing a lot of that kind of work. And then also a lot of this outreach. I absolutely love the community. I've been a part of the community for over 20 years. Again, I came from a little company with a pectin on it. I came up as an instrument electrical tech and to analytical systems, gas measurement systems, did a lot of SCADA work, a lot of DCS work. So I was able to kind of pivot through the downstream and upstream and midstream type environments. And I exited that company as a global technical lead. And before coming again to Dragos, doing my work here. Through this time also, I've been a large part of SANS, and then so I've got a degree from SANS, and also I'm a SANS instructor for ICS 612. So actually tomorrow I'm leaving for Dubai to teach that class. So really excited about doing that as well. So a little bit about Dragos. So most of you are here today because you know us, but a lot of people, when they think about Dragos, they think about services, or maybe the people that you've engaged with, or you may think about Worldview, our threat intelligence product. But really, Dragos, and just kind of level set, we're a tech company. And so what that means is we have the Dragos platform. And so everything around our company that we do it for the platform, for our technology. One of the things is I'm sure most of you folks can appreciate is people don't expand, but tech does. So if you can codify capabilities, insights, and those kind of things into a platform, which you can distribute in large environments, you can essentially expand your people base, expand that power and that capabilities. So a lot of what we do from the services aspect, from the threat intelligence aspect, from the community defense, that all feeds back into our platform to essentially codify the knowledge of the company and from the community, the insights that we've learned. And of course, we give that back to the community and those kind of things. From the community standpoint of view, that really goes into the capabilities that we have from, the Defender program and so forth, where providing insights and those kind of things from, different customers, sharing their information in metadata and being able to provide that out. Again, but the threat intelligence through the Dragos Worldview and the services arm doing, the architecture reviews, pen tests, IR work and that kind of stuff. So again, a lot of different facets of the company, but mostly we're focused around the platform and ensuring that that product is fit for purpose. Now today, again, what I want to do is look at a little bit of the timeline of events. Why are we here? What led us up to 2.C essentially, and looking at solutions and those kind of things around that, that directive. So timeline events. This all started back at Colonial. I remember when this hit. I was actually brought in as the Dragos, pseudo SME for the oil and gas, and so I did a lot of work around this. Helped write a lot of blogs around the Colonial pipeline. But it was a very impactful event because it showed us that if there is some sort of a threat to these environments, even doing the best practices of isolating our systems, we may not be able to actually run our systems. When you take apart or when you take away the ability to do custody transfer, which means, well, where is that molecule at within that pipe? Where is that going to? How can I account for it? How can I bill with it? So losing that capability of doing custody transfer, of billing, you can't run a pipeline for no profit. And so essentially, those are some of the ramifications around that. Now, of course, the other one was isolating the pipeline just to make sure that the systems wouldn't be impacted and affected, which is a great call. And that's something that we often teach around with tabletops and doing those kind of events. Is you have to train to contain your environment, and containment normally means that you are going to isolate your systems. So from that, though, of course, there had to be some response. This is a massive impact to the Eastern Seaboard. And so when we look at that, TSA came out and issued the 2021 directive. Now, in this one, I'm sure many of you have looked at it before. It's pretty high level. It pretty much just identifies, the focal point, identifies when to respond, that 24-hour response type protocol, and also identifies doing some assessments and so forth. But there's not much to it. Again, there's work around it. But from that, though, I think TSA and other industry partners realize that, hey, there's not enough here. And so really, that led to some other areas around, some other work. Now, TSA also went out and identified, what they would call the critical or the high impact pipelines, and came out with the 2020, or essentially the O2 series. Now, many of you on this call today have probably been tapped on the shoulder from TSA and notified that, hey, you're one of those, pipeline owner operators that fall under this regulation or, guidelines, and essentially you have to meet them. So when those came out, again, a lot more prescriptive type capabilities. So really kind of implementing, critical mitigations, looking around, contingencies and response plans, being able to run in that islanded mode, and those kind of things. So, and I'm testing the effectiveness of the practice. And so, from that, we see an issue of 2021B. When this came out, this was very much that prescriptive component, that document. I remember when a number of us within the Dragos team were able to get our hands on it and we're looking at it, it was like, wow, this is going to be a huge burden for people. Essentially taking out what is most challenging from like NERC SIP and throwing it over to pipeline owners and operators. That's a massive step change in capabilities, and one that is very, very challenging to meet. So nevertheless, and also it talked a lot about very prescriptive areas around, and again, I know you folks are dealing with this right now, but very prescriptive areas around IT tech. Talked about emails and SOAR products and all these kind of things that don't really fit a lot of times within the OT space. Now, fortunately, so again, from May to June, when this dropped on O1B, of course, it was classified, or that SSI marking, which means that if you weren't essentially handed the document, if you weren't one of those key pipeline companies, you shouldn't be or couldn't look at it. Kind of that security by obscurity, and it didn't really go over well within the community. Fortunately, TSA did remove that marking, so consultancy organizations and so forth could help and support with that information. And then here we are today. So back earlier this year, July 21st, TSA revised that document B to C. huge changes on that, and most of them were very welcome. When we see the reason why, and so for me being 20 years in an owner-operator environment, having something that is pushed down on me that's very, very prescriptive is part easy because I know what to do, but it's part like this doesn't fit, this doesn't work in my environment. And so the 2021-02B directive was very prescriptive. You shall do this with these types of controls. And many of you, again, have been kind of living this nightmare in a way of trying to implement these requirements within your systems. And again, a lot of them don't really work. I've seen a lot of pipeline companies that have been doing huge feats and efforts, under some of the requirements around being able to operate in islanded mode. I've seen massive architecture overhauls just with that, a couple words. A lot of, hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s of work and so forth. Also, the 02B was very much, again, like I said before, aligned with standards and had a lot of deadlines and dates and so forth. So it made it very challenging to implement. And I think, there was, and there, still is that pushback from the community to say, hey, this isn't fit for purpose. You need to make something that's a little bit more, more broader base, can fit in different environments and so forth. And so 2C is really that requirement where we came out now with performance requirements. So now we have objectives that you're supposed to meet instead of detailed controls that you're supposed to go implement, which is helpful, but again, now there's ambiguity. And so we'll talk a little bit about that ambiguity going forward, which means that now TSA has to approve your assessment plans and all those kind of things. There's that approval piece. Fortunately, 02C is aligned with standards. So you see a lot of different language in there from NIST, 882, you see API in there. And then it also has deadlines. So, so there are deadlines around submission, when to do certain types of activities and so forth, which we'll get into a little bit. So again, when we think about the timelines, there's an implementation plan that is due after the effective date. Now, this is actually, the implementation plan is past due. So that was October 25th. So hopefully everybody on the call has submitted that in, and now they are in the waiting game, essentially, to come to hear back from TSA. And I'd love to hear back and see if anybody has heard back yet. I'm thinking probably not, but I don't know. Maybe TSA has reached back and approved some of these plans, but I was just look at the sheer number of submissions and the size of the TSA team. This may take a little while to get your implementation plan approved, but nevertheless, it should have been submitted October 25th. The assessment plan is due 60 days after the approval of your plan. So right now, today, you should be working on that assessment plan, and we'll get into the details of what that is. But essentially there's that assessment plan, and that should be in the works right now. You also have a requirement of an incident response plan. This is not your IT incident response plan. This is a response plan focused around your pipeline assets and so forth. And there's some key areas in there. One of the things that I really like about this, and I'll touch on a little bit later, is that this really aligns with what we have been kind of really promoting in Dragos, is around the 5 key controls in OT, not the CIS top 18 or whatever, but the 5 key controls for ICS. And the number 1 is around having a good incident response plan. I've been involved in countless, or not countless, there's been a number of them. I've been involved in a lot of different things, but in a number of different response cases. And I'm not an IR person within my job role, but yet with my background in PLCs and DCS systems and so forth, I've been on a number of cases where the companies didn't have a good response plan or capabilities, or even know where their data was or logs and so forth, which made it extremely challenging trying to respond to an anomaly. Somebody trying to understand, is this a malicious activity or not? So nevertheless, that those response plans are very, very important. So you define how you respond, you define who you contact, you define the capabilities within the area. So let's first of all talk about the plan. And again, you folks have done, or should have done, a lot of work around this, kind of developed your plan, built it up, and those kind of things. But the first part of that plan was to And this aligns back to the CIS, the top 18 controls. It's identifying your critical system, so your assets, or so identifying your assets. But more importantly is identify your critical assets. Now, sometimes this is challenging to do because you look across your pipeline and you may think that everything out there is out there for a purpose. It's all critical. But there are certain ones that there may be even higher criticality. You may want to do more monitoring on. And this is actually around when you think about your critical assets. So within Dragos, we do something called a crown jewel analysis. And this is just a very, very quick example of where we can, kind of pinpoint different areas. Now, there is not one critical asset out, in your systems. There are multiple. So when people talk about doing like crown jewel analysis, I always like to kind of back up and say, just realize you'll have multiple. But this is a thought process in order for you to owners and operators kind of dig down through. So the way you do this is you look like you have a system owner. And from there, you kind of walk down. Of course, you're the owner. Your critical system or subsystem, you have a pipeline. You may have functions of pumping or compression. You may have the components under there of drives, vibration systems, pressure control, and then you have the controllers under there. So here we have the RTUs, PLCs, even flow computers can kind of go there. There was actually just a vulnerability recently released on a total flow computer for a vulnerability where you could actually manipulate those kind of things, which again, from a measurement background, is like, yeah, of course, you'd want to exploit a vulnerability on your custody transfer system. You could manipulate meter factors, do all kinds of craziness on that, and kind of cause a slow bleed of finance. So yes, flow computers are even part of that. You need to be thinking about, within your systems, what is critical. And then, of course, you look at those crown jewels, kind of as you kind of distill down what are the key areas. And then I like to flip this on its head and then kind of walk back through and see, okay, now I've identified my crown jewels. Now, what are the networking paths to them? How can an adversary compromise this thing? Can it come down through a remote connection, through a vendor connection? Can it come in through a portable device, and so forth? So that's just a quick crown jewel analysis. One thing around here, though, when we think about identifying critical systems, is a lot of times we put on this OT mindset, and that's proper, is where we just think about the DMZ South. But as we found within the Colonial Pipeline attack, DMZ North can be really critical as well. Well, again, what about those accounting systems? Or you may have your measurement allocation systems and so forth actually out in the business side. So those actually need to be considered as a critical system as well, and actually kind of fall under this scope. So it's not just OT proper systems. They can be hanging out in the IT side. Along with this is great. So this is actually another control that we call out with Dragos is the critical controls is segmentation. So part of the 2C plan is to, first of all, identify your critical devices and also now look at segmentation. And I love this around looking at dependencies. So many people don't actually know their dependencies on the IT/OT side. So if you do this islanded mode or break your connectivity, what systems will be affected? What are the owners of those systems or of that data? So being able to understand the dependencies, the connections, the boundaries, and so forth is really important. So this is all awesome stuff. Things that I actually look for all the time when I do architecture reviews. Again, looking at zone boundary security measures, and then within that, you have a DMZ, and that kind of drops you quickly down into access controls. And this is around one of the areas where so let me pop back up on segmentation. So when we think about that, we think about segmentation within, again, zones and conduits, going back to IEC 62443, and really thinking about, creating zones and limiting or creating zones of trust and being able to limit the connectivity across those zones. The DMZ is one of the areas, so within that, where when you create that DMZ, you're creating an area where you're allowing remote connectivity to occur securely. You're also, creating an area where you can put in management type capabilities, different servers, and so forth. Within that DMZ also, don't think of any of these networks as flat, or try not to. So I've seen some DMZs where they're completely flat. They have jump servers in them. They have all their network management and monitoring systems in them. They've got all these kind of systems, a lot of times with elevated privilege within that environment, and they're all on the same network or VLAN, if you will. That's not good. So because if one of those systems gets compromised, an adversary could easily pivot to another system and may use the trusted pathways. So I like to, even when we think about like the term DMZ, I like to think about segmentation within the DMZ to different services and platforms. Going down though, access control. So we have local and remote. So local is a lot of times when I think about local, I'm thinking about within the network, within that system. Of course, you folks are all running SCADA systems, so you also have on a lot of your minds that you're thinking about remote connectivity out to the field and so forth. But here, local is really around controls around the systems locally and/or remote connectivity. So here, one of the things is establish a schedule for password resets. And I love this little clause in here, is where feasible. On O2B, you didn't have this. You had to go do password resets on all your devices. As you know, getting out to all of your RTUs or whatever like that is extremely challenging. So here it's where feasible. So here it's you're doing your best effort. And I encourage you to go do your best effort. Don't leave password resets or don't just not do this because it's not quote unquote feasible. Do them, but do them in a nature where it makes sense to the risk and those kind of things of your and systems. Also around supplement with multi-factor authentication, again, where feasible. Multi-factor authentication absolutely needs to be done at the DMZ. But as we get down to the other levels, unless you have a CA root authority and those kind of things within your environment, doing multi-factor authentication can be challenging, again, depending upon your deployment. So I like to see multi-factor authentication if you can in control rooms and so forth. But again, think about, again, the hard shell of your T network. Absolutely do remote, multi-factor for remote access, and then think about doing it for your control rooms and so forth, and then moving down. But again, they've opened it up a little bit here and saying more feasible. Before, this was an absolute requirement. Least privilege, of course, this is just good security practices. So least privilege within the accounts. Don't run service accounts like with domain admin privileges and rights because it's easy to do and things work. Make sure that you're really constraining service accounts, constraining user accounts, using a different account for domain work versus normal user work, those kind of things. Thinking about just how the environment is maintained and updated. Also limit shared accounts. So shared accounts are often used, again, when you think about the devices. So, RTUs and PLCs, a lot of them don't have the capability of having different accounts. So that's a shared account. Also, I've seen a lot of times on control rooms, consoles, they'll have a shared account for that operator console. Again, we're seeing a movement away from that, and I would encourage that. But again, some of the older systems, it's very difficult to get away from that console shared account for that operator, operator on rotation. Also, it's one of the things that was around access control. And I really actually wish that this would have been firmed up, because I'm a very strong advocate of not allowing domain relationships and trusts across different trust boundaries, especially around OT to IT. And I've kind of side-saddled a couple of pen tests, and I just know our team, anytime our team finds a domain trust, they exploit it nearly 100% of the time, which means that, and again, we're on a tight time constrained pen test. So the adversary normally is not, it doesn't drop in an environment for 1 to 2 weeks with a, scope of these systems and so forth. An adversary is not defined normally by a small scope or small time. So if they find a system that is domain connected and trusted, they will exploit that system and gain access down the OT environment. They will do that. And so that's one of the main, that's a well-known attack path. It's a IT to OT attack path. People know it, people abuse it. So instead of just reviewing your domain relationships, please review and please remove between IT and OT. Now within OT, it is best practice actually not to have a shared Active Directory forest between your DMZ and also your supervisor network and below. like to see that DMZ be its standalone. Oftentimes there isn't even an Active Directory domain in the DMZ. And that's, but again, that all goes back to the size of your DMZ, how many systems you have, how easy it is to support and so forth, whether you have an Active Directory there or not. Nevertheless, so really review, but I'd encourage you to take this a step further and eliminate, domain trusts. Next one is around the continuous monitoring detection. And again, this is all in your plans that you've submitted already. But just thinking about this is what TSA was really wanting to do is monitoring and blocking code in communications. This is endpoint. This is either blacklisting or a deny listing or allow listing, I should say. Apologize for that. So allow or deny listing on this. So this is really about making sure that you're monitoring those connections, also auditing the connections between external systems. Now, without a tool to do this is going to be really hard. This is going to be almost impossible to do it well. So this is where, solutions such as the Dragos platform or other solutions out there can absolutely help. And this is where, again, putting tools in the environment to support the regulatory efforts is something that you need to be thinking about, because otherwise the work in doing this is not going away. Also, collect and analyze for intrusions and anomalous behavior, kind of going back to network monitoring. Also, host monitoring, though. So when you think about monitoring, always think about the two parts. Think about network monitoring those connectivity, what's out on the network, ports, protocols, services. Think about commands being across. All of that is on the network. But the network will only show you and tell you so much. You got to go to the host to get the other information. So being able to pull off Windows logs through like Windows Event Forwarding and other areas like that and send them to a SOC is very, very important. And that's kind of what this is getting at here. Also, measures to isolate OT in case of an incident. So this is going back to that area where you need to think about being able to island your systems. So isolate or island. So being able to contain holistically your OT environment or the critical systems, and then also be able to contain systems that are compromised. And your IR plan will actually come into this a little bit later. So think about this as multifaceted. So if you have a small incident, you may want to just segment part of it or isolate part of your systems, or even just unplug or virtually disconnect a virtual system to isolate in case of a detection or something like that of an incident. So think about isolation in a multi-tiered approach. Kind of the big break glass event is going to be island your entire environment, but you may be able to do a little bit more surgical approach and if you have monitoring capability of island certain systems out or isolate certain systems. Patch management. This is an area where I really, really appreciate the way that they've kind of gone to. This allows you to run your own patch program. So we're not back into that 30 to 35 days of NERC SIP where you had to, it's that wash, rinse, and repeat of looking at new patches, evaluating, deploying, and then going back and forth. And this allows you to really take that better approach. And the reason why I say this is, and something that I've talked about a lot within Dragos and other areas is around think about patching and think about doing it in your key systems that have high connectivity points. So this is normally around your Purdue level 3, your DMZ systems and so forth that have that high touch point between the IT and the OT side. Those are the areas that A, normally it's easier to patch. B, it's not again, because of that, it's not a vendor system. And also it's probably an area where if an attacker does come through it or an adversary, they are probably going to touch one of those systems first. So making sure that the systems up on the higher levels of the Purdue model are patched more frequently is really to your advantage, again, because it's much harder to patch RTUs and PLCs as well. And it just doesn't make sense to think about trying to patch all of our low-level systems all the time. If we do a good job at the perimeter, if we do a good job of monitoring our network, we can let the other stuff slide until we have maintenance intervals, outages, and so forth. Nevertheless, though, it's good to group your systems within your security patches, again, in different groupings, and then apply those patches and so forth. So all of these areas, think about these as you're developing a policy, and this kind of what I talked about in the workshop in Houston before October 25th. And I was really trying to emphasize that your implementation plan is really your policy for TSA. It is what you're going to do, and again, with procedures on how you're going to do it, of course. But think about that as that's an overall policy. This is our requirements for these systems, is what we're doing. And again, so part of that is criticality of patches. So you have to have that patch review process and cycle. Again, this is probably already pre-built the way you've been working in B. Prioritize patches with a known exploit vulnerability catalog. So this is one thing where you may not have been looking at this catalog. Now you probably need to include it to assess those patches and so forth. And also, of course, develop that timeline where patches can be applied. So if as a lot of times within operations, you have a product movement, you're not going to be patching your SCADA systems, even if there is something that's critical that just popped. So what you have to do there is, let's see, go back on my slide. So what you have to do there is essentially just, make sure that you have some sort of a process, a flow process in place where you can identify those, identify your timelines, look in mitigations if it's a critical patch and so forth. Just have that process in place, and that's all that they're calling out for here. Now, so it's again, we're past October 25th. We're in the middle of November 2022 as this recording has taken place. So when you think about that, you've already submitted. There will be changes to your plan. So the TSA has come up with some amendments. So first of all, if you sell, buy, a company, if you acquire new assets, acquire new pipeline, you have to have an amendment to your plan. If any conditions changed, so if you drastically change the plans, policies, documents, if TSA comes out and does an audit where some areas may not have proved out well and those kind of things, and there's some areas where it needs to be corrected, that all needs to feed back into your plan. So all these things, so amendments are there. They will probably occur within your environment. Also, one of the things too is if you install a different tool, different type of capability. So let's say right now you're running a like a denial listing type of a capability, and you go to a next-gen endpoint type solution. It's a fundamental shift on how that product works for endpoint security, and you would need to if you deploy that security control, you need to update the plan, submit it to TSA to get them to approve it. Again, if that also, there's a clause in there, if something is in for more than 45 days. So if you're doing something, if you're testing something out and it's not in process for 45 days, you do have some leniency there. So with that said, you can submit amendments, you can make changes, and again, they will give you, that 50 calendar days for, again, so once you make the change, you have 50 calendar days to submit, and hopefully they come back and approve. If not, then you do have an ability to, petition for reconsideration, and you can do that up to 30 calendar days after denial. So there's that process of kind of going back and forth for these amendments. A lot of the way I see it, it's a lot of it is kind of like the way you're getting your plans approved right now, and the way that's kind of playing out. So you will have to assess, and so part of the assessment plan is really thinking of again, the implementation plan is your policy, and the assessment plan is how you're going to assess, or I'll put a slash in there, how you're going to audit your environment. And because there's kind of both in here, it's kind of, if you read around, it's like we're doing assessments and auditing. So one of the things is, again, this was called a validated or a VADR, a validated architecture design review before. Now we're going to flip the V to a C and call it a CADR. So it's a cybersecurity architecture design review. Within that, and again, this is where tools come into play. So as you're doing an assessment plan, you're looking at your network traffic, you're looking at system logs and so forth, and designs, configurations. To do network traffic, you can go around and collect a bunch of PCAPs and throw it through Wireshark and Network Miner and different tools like that. but it's going to be very, very challenging to do. And again, this is ongoing. It's every 2 years, but it's an ongoing task. So this is an area where, being able to capture traffic at that north-south, north-south and east-west areas, and to do this real time will make your, design reviews much, much easier. So again, tooling really matters here. System log and analysis. If you have proper network log forwarding, sending it to a SIM and a SOC, doing this real time, you're kind of checking the box. You're doing it real time. It's not like you're dumping a bunch of Windows event logs and parsing through them and those kind of things. So being able to, toolify and being able to get, systems like that in here will really help, because with that capability, it'll really help around network design. So looking at all, your network design, if you know how your network works from a traffic perspective, from a protocol perspective, the design piece is, again, is much, much easier. Configuration is when we're looking at switches and routers and firewalls, looking at those configurations, looking at our access control lists. And then again, also interconnectivity, looking at all our different touch points between different vendors, our remote access and so forth. So again, all very key areas to be focusing on that are really important. And again, I'm glad they put these main areas in here. Same areas that a lot of times we focus on as Drake's professional services around looking in your systems and so forth. So again, good stuff. Now, one of the things, though, is they dropped this. So incorporate some other assessment capabilities. And then they drop pen testing. And so a lot of times when we think about pen testing and OT, people drop their coffee. It's like, oh my word, are you serious? So pen testing here, think about it is, and again, this is all on you. This is on you to define your scope and to define where this will be. My recommendation is to do assume breach type pen tests here. So again, do an assume breach pen test on your boundary areas. So around your DMZ area. So set up a system in IT or even the DMZ and allow a pen test team to try to find their way in, try to kind of hack their way in through those systems. And again, these capabilities you do every 2 years. And so one of the things I'd recommend is you do an architecture design review 1 year and doing something else the next year. So a pen test, a red purple team test, something like that, where you're evaluating your environment, you're assessing from that kind of that defensive posture, and then you look at it from the offensive posture and say, did it work? Do our controls work? Can we see it? And if you have the tools and the capabilities in place, those red and purple team type tests, especially a purple team, where the pen tester is sitting down and over like a Zoom call with the folks from the SOC side, and they're saying, okay, I'm going to run this, this exploit. Can you see it? Can you see me and your environment, what we're doing? And work the way through different attack paths and so forth, looking at different scenarios and being able to really understand your monitoring, detection, and blocking capabilities. And so again, they work with each other back and forth. So from a scheduling perspective, really recommend that you think about this from, we'll do this 1 year, we'll do, the more of the offensive type assessments the next year. And in the assessments the offensive ones can be modified. So if you have your SCADA system down for a while, you may be doing an overhaul on a pipeline or something like that, or some maintenance on it, that's a great time actually to do some OT focused pen tests. So I've actually seen areas where they've allowed teams to come in, drop them on a VLAN, actually blocked them off from getting anywhere else and said, this is your area, go have fun, tell us what you can do and where our controls are lacking. So you can do very surgical type of pen tests and those kind of things within the OT space very safely. But again, rules of engagement and scope are always very, very critical to defining out these types of tests and capabilities. One thing too is you can do this all in-house. So this you don't have to go reach out to a third party to have them do this. Now, I'd fully recommend you at least engage with a third party once in a while to make sure your in-house type of capabilities are up to best practices and so forth. It's always good to have an external perspective, even if you have all the knowledge and the right answers. Still that external perspective still, validates what you're doing. And I found a lot, again, as I was an owner operator, oftentimes we'd have an external party come in, and it was nice to just hear that, we had the right ideas and the right things going on. So nevertheless, so this can all be done in-house. But if it's done in-house, just make sure everything's documented properly and so forth, because we get into that audit perspective here in a second. So we think about compliancy. So this is that audit perspective. And so TSA will, can and will come in your areas and do audits. And when they do, they're going to be looking at a lot of documentation. Again, just to make sure that you're doing those assessments and so forth, making sure that your plans are in place. So with that said, TSA will be looking for a good asset inventory of both hardware and software. So I know personally, and I know from most of the community, asset inventories are very hard to do. So this is an area where you're going to have to, of course, people have been focusing on this for years. Keep focusing. Firewall rules, of course, there should be already a process in place to where rules are approved, rules are documented. You have something in a plan in place where you're validating your rules at a certain cycle, normally annually or even sooner. There auditors will also be in documentation you need to keep is diagrams. So again, when I think about diagrams, there's, of course, you have logical diagrams of your systems. A nice Visio is always good to look at. It doesn't tell you exactly what those systems are doing. So that's where the networking component comes into play. But a logical diagram, your switch router configurations, architectural diagrams, of course. And then, so diagrams, you have your network diagram, which is your more physical, where you show your systems, interconnections, and so forth. Your architecture diagrams are more the logical diagrams. Publicly routable IPs, so an IP list, and then also a VLAN schedule. So how do all these systems work? So all of that documentation you need to have in a place stored securely and ready for audit if and when needed. And also show when things are changed. So making sure that, like, if you do have a firewall, making sure that as different assets are added or removed, as you do assessments and things need to be firmed up a little bit, making sure that all that type of activity is documented. It helps for tracking and auditing. Also, any procedures and plans, assessment results, all that kind of stuff needs to be captured. And then they throw this data. So again, coming back to, being able to capture north-south, and they specifically identify both your north-south traffic and your east-west traffic. So again, north-south traffic, and Sands actually just dropped a great video. Dean Parsons just did on explaining this, a quick 6-minute video. But north-south traffic is essentially that traffic coming from the IT space or within the DMZ, coming down the level 3 Purdue model. When you hit down to like level 2 to level 1, that's normally where you consider that east-west traffic, that server to to RTU communication, or PLC to PLC, RTU to RTU, which you do see occasionally. It's that east-west traffic. It's control to control or system to control. So being able to see your control traffic, control protocols, and then those connections coming northbound, being able to put all that together is really important. And they call out that you actually need to keep that data for record. So this is a snapshot, or if you do this continuously, you already have it there. And again, log files, kind of somebody saying log files is really generic. What does that mean? Normally, though, when I see this, and when you look at a lot of the standards, and those kind of things, log files around your system logs, it's security logs and so forth. So think about event logs, all that is log files as your data. Incident response plan, we have a number of things around here. So again, that first thing is containment of the device. So this is really around needing to make sure that thinking about containment as in, if something is infected, being able to pull it off the network, being able to isolate it. Don't power it down. The reason why is because you need to preserve that system for forensics. You need to pull off memory, do a memory dump of it using like FDK or whatever. Use some sort of a tool to dump the memory and so forth, and that is actually talked about in here. So containment, so you contain the device, you pull the forensic evidence out of it, making sure that's all in your response plan and people understand that. Segregation of the network. So again, we go from a system or a device to now a network of, so being able to, identify and being able to have the capability of saying, these assets in this VLAN look like they're compromised. We may have malware spreading. We're not sure. Being able to block that off. So think about your system and how you'd respond to that. Would you, have capability of logging into a firewall and shutting down different interfaces, all those type of things? Or do you have a break glass and you have cables identified that you go unplug? All those kind of things need to be thought of. Also, in that kind of, so we go from the device to the network to the actual IT/OT. So this is where you drop your system in island mode, where something is going on the IT side, like Colonial Pipeline, and you protect your critical OT systems and you go into isolate. So you isolate the IT from the OT. And so being able to, again, to identify the traffic, the devices, the critical systems from IT and OT and what will be affected, and hopefully you can still operate when you do that. Also around secure and maintain backups. So it's not just about pulling backups, it's making sure that those backups are offline, potentially vaulted out. But nevertheless, we see so many ransomware type of activities. They'll hit the systems, and a lot of times the ransomware or the threat actors will go directly to the backup systems and compromise and encrypt those first. So thinking about your backup systems, making sure that you're pulling them, and also that you've got a copy offline vaulted out somewhere, that if your backup online system does get corrupted, you're able to restore from an offline system. And of course, thinking about conducting exercises, so important. So this is tabletops. And so what they actually call out as doing this an annual tabletop, which I really, really applaud. And again, this can be done in-house or it can be done third party. And same thing like your assessment plan, I'd recommend you going out to third party once in a while to see how the other person's doing it and those kind of things. And then you can bring those knowledge and capability back inside your company and move this forward. Nevertheless, however you choose to do it, you've got to do a tabletop. And I've done a lot of tabletops lately. They're extremely valuable because you walk through, you choose a scenario to your industry. Again, a ransomware scenario could be a scenario for a network monitoring tool that gets compromised via software supply chain. Whatever that scenario is that you can play it out in your environment and begin to understand what, when you'd see certain things, who to respond, who to contact. You identify the teams within your organization who would help. And in a lot of times you identify silos where this team is going to stand up a huddle or a war room, and you have all these different huddles going on and people aren't communicating, those kind of things. Those are all a lot of times brought out and made evident by doing tabletops. And so tabletops assess your plans, capabilities, and also identify areas that you probably hadn't thought about, but you do need to remedy before the actual event occurs. And then, of course, identifies who's in charge of your response. So the incident commander and those kind of things, who's in charge from that OT perspective. So that person does need to be identified in the response plan. And again, this kind of comes down. So there's been a SANS paper recently released on this. Rob, CEO of Dragos, Robin Lee, and also Tim Conway wrote it, talking really about the 5 critical controls. So a lot of the things that I've been talking about here is around the 5 controls. It's identifying and developing that OT specific response plan. This is not a copy paste of IT response. This is an OT response plan for your pipeline operations. Second one is so once you have that in place, you can respond and you have the capabilities of responding to an event. Second one is that, again, that defensible architecture, making sure that you've set up your system so that it can be defended, that it's not just flat, that it has choke points in place, that it has monitoring capability, that if you do see or identify malicious and or even misconfiguration. I've found that so many times in these networks where just being able to see in your network, and that goes into network monitoring, but being able to see in your network, you a lot of times identify like a SCADA system is trying to pull this whole set of old RTUs that aren't there. But you can identify all that traffic, all this pulling going on with network monitoring. So again, on a SCADA site that I was at, I did administrator for, able to see this easily. At a refinery where I worked, we're able to see all kinds of PLCs and analyzers that were misconfigured when we put in monitoring. So again, monitoring is part security, but it's also about resiliency and understanding your operations and configurations. The next, again, secure remote access, looking at making sure that remote access is done securely using multi-factor authentication, using jump hosts that are segregated from different vendors, different environments. So one jump host may be for your technicians, another one may be for engineers and so forth. A third may be for vendors. Thinking about separate, again, least privilege type scenarios. And then the fifth, it's key vulnerability management. It's again looking at what's out there for vulnerabilities, not not really going after all the vulnerabilities. We can't do that in OT, but understanding the critical ones and where they need to be deployed and when they need to be tested and updated and so forth. So again, thinking about the timeline, we've got about 9 minutes left, but thinking about the timeline here, this is kind of where we're at. So right now we're kind of in this gray space, is that hopefully people on the call have submitted their plan October 25th. Here we are at this kind of this waiting game. Right now I did put in like an 80 days, but who knows? Again, some of you on the call may have received response back already. If so, it's great. Others may not. So right now you're waiting, but don't let the waiting pause other efforts. You still have the the assessment program and that kind of stuff, or in a response plan to be working on. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. And then when you think about this, begin to think about when your assessment begins, when it's due, and so forth. And think about this whole process is that 2-year cycle where you're doing a architecture review, that cybersecurity architecture review, then you're doing some sort of efficient measure. So all these kind of things is going on every 2 years. Try to split it up. My recommendation is every year you got something going on, that you're doing some sort of a audit or assessment within your environment. So this is a good slide to have, good reference. And it's something that, again, as the slides are provided, recommend. A number of folks in the other workshop we did actually said, I'm going to put this up in my office just so I can be a visual reminder of some of the critical dates and some of the things I need to be thinking about going forward. So a couple of takeaways here. So we have, again, the implementation plan. Again, fortunately, hopefully that's done and submitted. Response plan and assessment plan. Assessment plan was due 25th. The response plan should be in evergreen state right now, though. As I said before, there is the wording in that the language is TSA considers this in a final state today. And a final state means that if you do a tabletop tomorrow, you have some changes, you can update your response plan, you'll be good to go. As everything that we do, when we're issued different directives, when we're issued different things like that within our companies, these are an opportunity for budget. These are an opportunity for funding, for additional resources, for additional tooling and capabilities in your systems. I would really recommend you use this to really help support your OT security efforts. It's again, this is the cup, half full versus half empty way of looking at it. This is absolutely the half full, is where you're thinking this is a opportunity to really improve your maybe upgrading your field devices, you're upgrading your SCADA systems, you're upgrading your two-factor authentication system coming through. Those are the areas where you can focus on and really support yourself. So I know it's a lot of work. Fortunately, with 2C, it's helped quite a bit. It's giving you a little bit more leniency to go kind of choose your own path, but also make sure you take advantage of that as well. There are a number of resources from Dragos lately that we've dropped. So back in, Jim did this back in August. Jim Gilson, he's been, again, part of this, many standards bodies and support of this blog, implementing this directive. We also have a nice kind of infographic around the directive, and a lot of the things I've covered on this this webinar today. We also have, which just dropped a couple days ago, actually, in a fantastic white paper on lessons learned from a lot of the assessments that the Dragos team has been doing. So and within this also, there is at the appendix, there's a significant amount of detail around, right now, and it's something I should have brought up before, but right now you're still in 2B. Even though 2C is dropped, if your plan has not been approved, you still got to do controls that you did yesterday. And so right now we're in this kind of standing on the fence between 2B and 2C. And so this white paper shows a lot of detail around some considerations moving from 2B to 2C, things you need to be doing right now and so forth. So highly recommend you pulling that down and having a look at it. We also did a good webinar. So if you're not yet tired of webinars, you can pull another one down and listen to it. One where Jim was on the panel, and also Sam from marketing and product kind of went into this in similar light, but also looked at the Dragos platform and different ways that Dragos can support these efforts through the platform, the product, and also from the services perspective. What I just covered, here are the references. And again, these are hyperlinks. So when you pull down the PDF that will be shared a little bit later, you will be able to click on these and pull them out. And again, I'm highlighting that recent white paper from InSands, the 5 critical controls, absolutely a phenomenal piece of work. And so really recommend you looking at that as well. With that, 4 minutes to bottom of the hour. Any questions? I know I've rambled almost the whole time, so we'll see. There are no questions trickling in. I see nothing right now. No need to prolong this anymore. Yeah, absolutely. If there is something that comes to mind that you may have thought about, or as you pull down these resources, you may have some questions, absolutely feel free to reach out and to Becky, and she'll kind of forward those questions along as we go. But with that, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. I also, when I think about what you folks do day in, day out, keeping an incredible amount of product moving back and forth to keep our society really running. I really applaud your efforts. I thank you so much for what you do, for your impact to the communities, to society, and for your desire to learn a little bit more about this directive and also come along and partnership with Dragos. So thank you so much.